Tonight on PBS News Weekend, why more Americans are managing their own abortion since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Then the increasing strain on America's wildland firefighters as climate change-driven wildfires are on the rise. And the challenges to the influence of American megachurches.
Anything that happens in a megachurch gets amplified because they have such a high profile in our religious landscape, for sure.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket.
Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular,
You get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing.
have a nice day.
and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. After Israel and Hezbollah traded cross-border attacks early today, each side signaled there'd be no further escalation, for now. Before dawn, about 100 Israeli warplanes struck more than 40 Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. Israelis said it thwarted an attack. Lebanese officials said 3 people were killed and 2 others hurt. A short time later, Hezbollah fired a barrage of missiles and drones toward Israel, hitting, the group said, a military intelligence site. An Israeli Navy officer was killed and 2 other service members wounded. At a cabinet meeting this morning, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the operation was a success.
What happened today is not the end of the story. Hezbollah tried to attack the state of Israel with rockets and drones early in the morning. We instructed the IDF to carry out a powerful preemptive strike to remove the threat. The IDF destroyed thousands of short-range rockets, and they were all intended to harm our citizens and our forces in the Galilee.
Hezbollah's leader warned that precision missiles may be used in the future as the group tries to stop the aggression in Gaza. Efforts to reach a negotiated ceasefire in Gaza pressed ahead today in Cairo. In Germany, a 26-year-old man turned himself into police, saying he carried out Friday night's knife attack in Solingen that killed 3 people and wounded 8 others. Authorities say the man is a Syrian citizen who had applied for asylum in Germany and that he was motivated by the extremist group, the Islamic State. Russian missiles are hammering Ukrainian border towns as Ukraine's forces inch farther into Russian territory. In southern and eastern Ukraine, 4 people were killed and nearly 40 others injured in Russian strikes. While Ukraine's Air Force said its defense systems intercepted most of the missiles, some found their targets. A hotel housing a group of journalists was heavily damaged. Hurricane Hone passed just south of Hawaii, dumping about a foot of rain on the south side of the Big Island, enough to extinguish fears of wildfires from the storm's winds. The island still faces other dangers: flooded roads, rough surf, and rip currents. Another storm, Hurricane Gilma, is still far to the east of Hawaii. It's forecast to weaken before it reaches the islands. And New York Yankees jersey worn by Babe Ruth has set a record for the most expensive sports collectible. It's the jersey Ruth had on when, according to legend, he called his home run during the 1932 World Series. When a 6-hour bidding war ended at 5:30 this morning, an anonymous buyer had the winning bid of $24 million. An auction house official called it the Mona Lisa of sports memorabilia. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, why more people and money are needed to fight U.S. wildfires, and the growth of American megachurches.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
A new study says that since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade 2 years ago, the percentage of people who say they've tried to end a pregnancy outside the medical system has gone up. The study from a University of California, San Francisco research group called Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health offers new details on who appears to be most affected by new abortion restrictions. Shefali Luther is reproductive health reporter for the 19th News, and she's the author of Undue Burden: Life and Death Decisions in Post-Roe America. First of all, Shefali, the term they use in the study is self-managed abortions. They say it's trying to end a pregnancy outside the medical system. What are they talking about? What does that mean?
I think this is a really important point to clarify because self-managed abortion is quite broad, and there are all sorts of mechanisms people can use and have used for decades, even centuries, to try to end a pregnancy without the support of a healthcare provider, whether that's a physician or a nurse or what have you. And so in this paper, they looked at people who use methods that may or may not work, things like herbal supplements. They looked at things like trying to inflict harm upon oneself to end a pregnancy. And they also looked upon using medication independently without the supervision of a physician, which can be quite safe and very effective, but is considered self-managed abortion. And what we've seen is that this broad array of ways in which people try and end pregnancies on their own, it's always existed and has always been a means used by people who don't feel comfortable in or feel safe in or have access to reproductive health care through the medical system. But it's also becoming more common now because of abortion bans and because there are people who, when they want to end a pregnancy, will end one no matter what, but may not have the means to, for instance, travel outside of their state to a place where abortion is legal.
What does this tell us about the evolution of post-Roe America? What does this tell us?
I think the most important thing it tells us is that when people want abortions, they will try to get them. Many of them will be successful, others will not be. We saw in the study increases across the board in different mechanisms people use to end pregnancies. We saw, a lot more people using herbal supplements, which may or may not work. They're not always very well researched, so we can't say for sure. We saw more people using self-harm. We also saw more people using medications that they obtained independently to end pregnancies. People are going to great lengths to try and access care, and that means that our abortion landscape keeps changing as a result. It creates this almost whack-a-mole kind of game between people who want to restrict abortion and those who are desperately trying to find new ways to get it.
Those changes, that's going to continue to develop and evolve over time. We're not frozen in time here.
We are absolutely not frozen in time. You can look at the ongoing presidential campaign where abortion is very much front and center because the two parties are quite different on this issue. The Republican Party is largely allied and aligned with organizations that want to ban abortion, that, pushed for decades to get Roe v. Wade overturned and are now pushing for more restrictions that will impair access to the procedure and to care nationwide. On the other side, we have the abortion rights movement and healthcare providers that are largely allied with Democrats that are trying to find ways to strengthen abortion access where possible, even within the reality knowing that getting something like Roe v. Wade's protections anytime soon isn't that likely.
Did the study say anything about how many of these people who tried self-managed abortions reported complications, had to go to physicians because of complications?
It was quite low. Very few people went to the emergency room or to the hospital, which is good news because what it shows is that the concern that many folks had when Roe was overturned, that people would resort to, the apocryphal back alley coat hanger abortion, that's not quite bearing out. People are finding ways that are safe and effective. One number I was really struck by was the percentage of people who used medication, in particular, mifepristone, misoprostol, maybe a combination of the two. And that went up by several percentage points. It was a significant increase. And that underscores that people are finding ways that are medically safe, medically effective, that have low risk and low complication. At the same time, I don't want just to be naive to the fact that people are facing medical risk in other ways, often through being denied access to pregnancy-related care when they experience complications, cases where abortion is a necessary form of medical treatment. But when people are trying to manage their own abortions, some are experiencing danger, are experiencing harm, but many are finding a way that is quite safe and quite healthy to do so.
What did the study say about who is disproportionately seeking these self-managed abortions? And what does that tell us about who is most affected by these new abortion restrictions?
We see a disproportionate share of Black Americans and LGBTQ plus Americans being the ones to get abortions outside the medical system. The study doesn't break down, for instance, whether people in those demographics are more likely to get more effective means of self-managed abortion or less effective ones. That's a little bit too granular. But this does tell us something that has been becoming clear for quite a while. I have had so many researchers, scholars, doctors, healthcare providers say to me, this is increasingly a story of inequality. And it always was. Abortion bans hurt everyone, but they hurt people unequally. The fall of Roe v. Wade is a massive change. It has implications across America. People aren't untouched by this, no matter their race, their class, frankly, their gender. But the impacts are unequal, and they are heightened for people who are traditionally marginalized by our healthcare system regardless.
Shefali Luther of the 19th News, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
As wildfires become more frequent and more devastating, wildland firefighters are often the last line of defense protecting homes and communities. While these crucial public servants are in high demand right now, their paychecks are sometimes smaller than some fast food workers. And unless Congress acts, a temporary pay raise for federal firefighters will expire at the end of September. Stephanie Sy has the story.
This year's wildfires have already burned 5.4 million acres in the United States and forced thousands of people to evacuate their communities.
People that we know that went by and looked at the property said it's burned down. Everything, our stuff is all burned up.
While fire evacuees flee to avoid danger, every year thousands of wildland firefighters are deployed to the front lines.
There's crews right now in the country that have already completed 7 14-day assignments. And on average anymore, federal wildland firefighters are sleeping in the dirt and on assignment in excess of 130 days a year.
Luke Mayfield was on a hotshot crew for 18 years. Hotshot firefighters are called on to suppress the largest and most intense wildfires in the country. The mobile teams face grueling hours and tough conditions. And they're stretched thin. In recent years, agencies have been short-staffed. By mid-July, even though the Forest Service had met its hiring goal of onboarding more than 11,000 firefighters, those numbers don't tell the whole story.
Across the nation, we are missing 25% of the desired capacity of roughly 18,000 federal wildland firefighters across the Department of Interior and United States Forest Service. And if you look at geographically specific locations, especially in the state of California, some of those vacancy rates can exceed 50+%.
These are very serious shortfalls you seem to be describing. I don't think the average person understands. Does that mean it's difficult for containment? Does that mean lives are threatened, homes are threatened?
All of the above. There's not enough people to respond in a timely and adequate manner. There's not enough people around. And that results in, national level discussions of how you triage where people go and how many people are allocated to any given assignment on any given day.
Triage always means that there's a patient that suffers. And in the wildfire case, I guess that means there's something that burns.
Something that burns, communities that are threatened. And it also means that mitigation and management work is not being done because everybody is responding to wildland fires.
Wildfires this year in Ruidoso, New Mexico and Northern California have consumed hundreds of homes. Firefighters themselves have suffered losses.
I feel luckier than some of the people here because we do have a few things, not very much, but a few things to hold in our hands that survived.
With climate change increasing the severity and frequency of wildfires, trained wildland firefighters are needed more than ever. But Mayfield, now head of a nonprofit that advocates for federal fire personnel, says the pay scale doesn't reflect the demands of today.
You need as much time on the fire line as possible in order to make a livable and plannable income, which results in the regular need of trying to accrue 1,000 or more hours of overtime for a majority of wildland firefighters.
You need to do 1,000 hours of overtime every fire season in order to make ends meet.
Yeah, I would say that is very fair to say, and that's 1,000 hours in roughly a 5 to 6 month period.
Under the bipartisan infrastructure law, wildland firefighters were guaranteed a minimum wage of $15 an hour, but that expires this fall. Mayfield and others are pushing Congress to pass legislation that would lead to a more permanent pay increase.
Everyone's looking for certainty, and we need that stable, sustained funding over time. Without congressional action, and only reinforces the fears that wildland firefighters currently have about our support and our commitment to their careers that are needed.
We have 30,000 firefighters in the system that are engaged on large fires. We're seeing a lot of injuries. We're seeing a lot of near misses. We've had a number of fatalities.
Alex Robertson is another former hotshot. He still works for the Forest Service, but says the life of a wildland firefighter no longer fits his lifestyle.
I was married and had 2 young sons, and being on a hotshot crew, being away from home for that amount of time, being in a very dangerous line of work, wasn't going to play out very well.
It also didn't play out well for Luke Mayfield. While he was helping save lives, he felt helpless in his own.
The only place that I ended up feeling normal was when I was on fires, and the only place that I didn't want to be was on fires, which for me resulted in never diagnosed, but seasonal depression and a consistent conversation of whether or not my family was better off with a life insurance check versus me being at home.
Better pay would have helped, but so would a more humane pace, says Robertson.
We know that our folks can't just go for the next 2 months, day in and day out, at the pace that they're going right now. It really is about building in some breaks, building in some rest, and so they can be effective and at their best at the end of the fire season like they are at the beginning of the fire season.
Despite the challenges, Mayfield says wildland firefighters love what they do. It sounds like the kind of job you would only want to do single and young and for a couple of years, and yet you did it for 20 years. What continued to drive you in this job?
I mean, it's a public service. I think people are drawn to that, and it is the most gratifying and life-shaping job that I've ever had. It's the one thing that I did in my life that was truly motivating and motivated me to be a better person, be a better leader, and take care of people.
Now they're asking lawmakers to take care of them. For PBS News Weekend, I'm Stephanie Sy.
Across the nation, there are hundreds of thousands of religious congregations. And as Lisa Desjardins reports, some of the biggest, known as megachurches, are facing challenges as the culture around organized religion changes.
Woven into the U.S. political conversation is another discussion about religion and its role in the country. A rising force has been megachurches, Christian congregations with 2,000 worshipers or more. While there are fewer than 2,000 of those megachurches, a fraction of churches overall, they are so large that they draw nearly 7 million Americans on average. They grow even as Americans overall become less religious. Recently, though, megachurches have also been in the spotlight for the resignations of 2 high-profile pastors. To look at this more deeply, I'm joined by Scott Thuma, a professor of sociology of religion at Hartford International University. Scott, first of all, how much have megachurches grown, especially relative to other churches, since the pandemic?
Well, they certainly took a significant hit, probably even more so than other congregations during the pandemic. But they are very attractional, and consequently, many people flock to them because they had all of the amenities that people were looking for in a congregation. They had robust Sunday school programs, youth programs, and exciting worship. And so consequently, they've drawn in a lot of folks when other churches haven't.
Now, in terms of what we've heard about these two pastors, the two that we're talking about are Tony Evans, who said he committed a sin, but he didn't specify what that was as he resigned. The other is a pastor named Robert Morris. He's also someone who's worked with former President Trump as an advisor to him. He admitted to sexually abusing a 12-year-old in the 1980s when he himself was in his 20s. Do megachurches have more issues and misconduct than others, or is it just that they're more high profile?
Well, much of it has to do with the high-profile nature of these churches. They have a significant spotlight on them, and consequently, any misconduct or misbehavior gets amplified in some sense because of their platform. We don't have really good data on congregations and the incidence of misconduct across all congregations, but certainly anything that happens in a megachurch, even to one of the lower level staff or that someone's ministry, gets amplified because they have such a high profile in our religious landscape, for sure.
And these mega churches are also mega businesses just by the nature of having so many people attend. What are the challenges and the benefits of dealing with dollars and also trying to deal with the divine?
They really are a kind of corporation scale. The average megachurch has well over $5 million annual budgets, and they might have upwards to 100 to 200 staff people. And it takes an exceptional team of people to run those, but then also to remain a kind of spiritual reality. And those two don't always mix. Consequently, I think in recent years, we've seen a lot of megachurches turn to organizations like ECFA, Evangelical Financial Accountability Organization, and also putting into practice rules and background checks and all of those kinds of things to really try to professionalize even more so than most small churches, for sure.
I know from my experience with mega churches, they really can feel like small communities, small towns in it themselves. Can you talk about how they supervise what they do? They're not necessarily part of other denominations. They're kind of sort of their own independent branch of Christianity, perhaps, some each one to itself.
About 40% of megachurches are what we call non-denominational. They're not connected to a national denomination that's recognized as a religious entity. Consequently, those 40% really are autonomous, and they may have some network connections with other churches, but they really are accountable only to themselves. But a lot of the megachurches, even if they are denominational, because they're so large compared to the average congregation in the United States, which is about 60 people, it's a difference between a David and a Goliath, right? And that raises a lot of issues around accountability. If something happens, is the denomination going to come in and say, "I'm sorry, you need to make some changes," and if they're non-denominational, who's going to do that? The board of the church is oftentimes picked by the pastor of that church and is internal to the congregation. So that makes accountability pretty tough.
As you mentioned, these churches have a lot of appeal. They especially have brought in often a more diverse crowd than we see, especially in other evangelical churches, younger crowds, lots of sort of passionate youth activity. Now that's in contrast to the fact, as I mentioned, that Americans overall seem to be shrinking away from organized religion. Why do you think there is that trend in America now?
We've seen over the last few decades, actually, even before the rise of the non-affiliated, a kind of disconnecting from civic organizations. And that has compounded now with younger generations finding other things to do or finding other ways to be spiritual than belonging to a particular congregation. And with the average age of of the attender rising in most churches and the negative publicity that a lot of congregations get because of anti-LGBT or women's issues or other scandals that have happened. All of those things, I think, go against younger generations finding them a sufficient place to go and become spiritual. They would much rather find other ways, whether it be soul cycle or going hiking in the woods or something.
Interesting. Scott Thoma, this is a fascinating area. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.
And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.